All right, guys, welcome. This one is going to be Money Management 3.4 Aspects Affecting Money Management. So, this is going to be all the areas of the other aspects of personal finance and how they relate to money management. So, here's just a couple takeaways of what I want you guys to gather from watching this tutorial. In this one, we're actually going to talk about the core four and how each one of those affects money management, and they're going to affect it in certain ways. So once we've identified that, then we can actually address the problem. But we first have to understand what the problem is before we can address it. But before we begin, the financial information contained in this video is for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing specific financial advice. You should contact a financial advisor to obtain specific financial advice. So this is the course overview. So as you guys may or may not know, this one was actually created after the others. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So this one was actually created after all the others. So if you guys look to see which one was published last in the money management series basic, you're going to find that this one is going to be published the last. And one of the main things that I wanted to do is I wanted to cover everything else before I actually jumped into this one. But this one is actually going to be about the core four. But let's actually get into that. Okay, so this is the foundational areas of personal finance. So if you guys watch the money management overview or the debt management overview, what you guys probably remember is me saying in the realm of personal finance, there are four areas that constitute the foundation, and that is behavioral economics, risk management, money management, and debt management. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how the other three relate to money management. So when it comes to the core four in personal finance, that's a phrase that I'm coining this. You have to understand that each one of these four aspects of personal finance are interdependent. What that means is they do depend upon each other. So let's get into behavioral economics and money management. This is how your behavior affects money management. So when it comes to behavioral economics, one of the things that I want to start off with you guys talking about is most people think that the problem that they have with managing money or with money just in general or personal finance is one of the following: lack of discipline, family and upbringing, education, school system, taxes as far as the government's concerned, the Federal Reserve Bank or banks in general, big business, large corporations, or the wealthy, top 1%. So what I'm here to say is that these in and of themselves are not the problem that you're having with money. Yes, I'm being completely honest with you. They are not specifically the problem that you have with money, but they do influence it. Now, when it comes to money, what you have to understand is you have certain behaviors that override whatever thoughts you have about money. Now, in order to understand what that behavior is, I'm going to introduce two things. The first thing is going to be T. Hart Edgar and his money blueprint. And this is the subconscious programming that we've picked up through adolescence. So through the first 7 years of our lives, and how it affects personal finance and wealth. The next one that I'm going to talk about is Deborah Price and her money archetypes. So this reveals the nature and the temperaments that people operate under when handling their personal finances. So let's start with the archetypes. So this is the temperaments affecting money management. So some of you guys have probably heard of the Sacred Money Archetypes, and that one is slightly different. From the way that I'm going to segment it, it's probably better if I use Deborah Price and her money archetypes. So what you're going to see on the top are active money archetypes, and on the bottom are passive money archetypes. So on the top, what we have is the martyr, we have the tyrant, we have the warrior, and we have the magician. So just to give you a basic understanding of what each one of them are, the martyr, that would typically be someone who does things for you, but there's strings attached. So they'll do covert contracts. So a covert contract is essentially when someone does something for you and they don't say it, but they expect something in return. So that's one. So the next one is the tyrant. So the tyrant is typically what people think of when they think of someone who's really good with money. This is typically someone who can go out and they'll get a lot of money. They may bust a couple heads and they may upset people in the process, but they tend to be thought of as the best one to have. So the warrior, that is something that I'm going to coin kind of like a hustler. This is the kind of person who makes things happen. Typically what happens with a warrior, and what's different about a warrior and a tyrant, is the fact that warriors tend to have people's respect, and people tend to love a warrior and their ability to get things done. The next one is a magician. The magician is probably the apex of the active archetypes. And what this person can do is, you may not even know how they get certain things done, but they get it done. They're always good about money, and they tend to be the best person to model your behavior around. If you had to choose between the active money archetypes, I would definitely recommend that you either find someone who's more of a warrior, a hustler, or someone who's a magician. Now, when it comes to the passive money archetypes, one of the things that you guys have to understand is not everybody is going to be active. And that goes back to temperaments. When it comes to money, not everyone's going to be active, same way that not everyone's going to be good with mathematics. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a role when it comes to personal finance and money management. So what we're going to talk about now is the passive money archetypes. And the first one is the innocent. So the innocent is probably what everybody is born into. And essentially, this one is very malleable. And if they know exactly what they should be looking for, they can then go off and then imitate it. One of the major things about the innocent is the fact that a lot of women tend to stay here, and that's not always the most beneficial, because you tend to follow whatever you see, or whatever is the most dominant, and that's not always the best one, because if you're an innocent and you follow, let's say, a tyrant, then you may go around thinking that a lot of the things that the tyrant does is good, but the tyrant in it of itself, someone who has a tyrant money archetype, they tend to have emotional insecurities that are much greater than any one of the other active ones. And that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're an innocent. The next one is the fool. So the fool is similar to the innocent, except this is typically someone who knows that they should be good with money, but they tend to just lavishly spend. One of the things about this one is, as far as the passive archetypes, these tend to be people who can get a lot of money, but they tend to squander the money on good times, and they don't save, and they don't pay attention to their finances. The next one is the victim. So the victim is exactly what it sounds like. This is typically a person who has gone through pain. Typically, victims have gone through pain, and it's legitimate. But the problem is they haven't overcome that pain, and it's kind of like they've been victimized twice, because now they actually use that as a means of not going forward. And that's one of the problems with the victim, especially when it comes to money. Now, the next one is the creator, or the artist. Now, the artist the creator is the apex of the passive money archetypes. So if you have a passive money archetype and you can't switch to an active one of the things that you should go for is the creator. Essentially, the creator is someone who's incredibly good at figuring out how to set goals. These tend to be things like, these tend to be individuals like artists who just create amazing works of art. But one of the problems and one of the reasons why it's a passive one is because they tend to also shy away from money. And what I mean by shy away from money is there's certain times where they may not want to do certain things because they feel that it would affect the way that they act and how they would behave. And typically when you're dealing with a artist / creator, these individuals, they could potentially make a lot of money and do a lot of good in the world. But what happens is they're usually so rigid when it comes to monetizing whatever it is that they're doing. So I know this is a very basic understanding of each of the 8 money archetypes that I just brought up. So what I'm going to tell you guys to do is look at the behavioral economics series, and that has a lot more information than I could cover in this particular video. I had to gear this towards money management, so I can't go into detail about each individual archetype. But all I really want you guys to know is I want you guys to know the 3 to thrive. So these are the 3 money archetypes that you guys should be striving for in order to effectively manage your money and manage your finances. So the first one is the warrior, and the warrior is exactly what I told you guys before. That is the hustler. These are people who make things happen, and they're great at hitting goals. So when it comes to a creator, creators tend to be incredibly good at setting goals and figuring out which goals they need to hit. Now, the last one is the magician, and the magician can be a great mentor or model, definitely. And these guys can go back and forth between hitting goals and setting goals. Well, setting goals and hitting goals, but you guys know exactly what I mean. So now I already broke down what some of the active money archetypes are and talked about some of the passives. So now let's talk to you about how do you figure out if you're an active or a passive. And it comes down to one question. How do you feel about money management? So typically if you guys have more of an active archetype or temperament when it comes to money, you would tend to go to feeling determined about making it work if it doesn't work. You feel responsible, meaning that you know that it comes down to you, and you're going to handle it. The next one is relieved. So when you see stuff like this tutorial, or when it comes to the money management series, to see that there's a lot of information for you guys to get, you feel relieved, and you also feel excited because now you know that you can find the information that you need in order to go forward. When it comes to active, typically, if you guys remember the four questions for effective money management, typically if someone has an active money archetype or temperament, they tend to answer those questions very efficiently. And if they don't, then they could probably figure it out in a relatively short amount of time. Now, when it comes to someone who has more of a passive one, some of the things that you may feel if you have to handle your finances by yourself, you may feel burdened. You may feel forced to do it. You may feel nervous about it. You may even feel anxious. And sometimes you may even feel depressed if you're not seeing the kind of results that you want with your finances. So what's important here is for you to understand a lot of the stuff that I was talking about with automating the process, and the part where you have people that are what's important for people to do when they're going into their finances. So when it comes to setting goals and figuring out what your goals are, that's something that you can thrive to do. Now, you may have problems when you figure out, well, how am I going to do that, and actively going ahead and doing it. But you can start the process by figuring out what your goals are. Once you figure out what your goals are, trying to navigate through this particular subject makes it a lot easier. So my recommendation to anybody who has a passive money archetype, or if you know that you have a passive money archetype, is for you to figure out what your goals are and then take it from there. Now, for the active money archetypes, you guys need to figure out the information that you need in order to effectively manage money and handle your finances. So what you guys are probably wondering now, okay, I just showed you 8 temperaments for people who manage their money. Now, what you guys are probably asking at this point is, how does that happen? So when it comes to your money archetype, it's affected essentially by 3 causes. So one is verbal programming, and that's pretty much what you heard about money and what you heard about people who make a lot of money. Another one is modeling. So this goes back to what you saw. So remember what I said back in adolescence. So when you were younger, whatever you saw, that is going to be modeling. So that's what you're going to model your behavior about. Then the next one is specific incidents. So these are specific events that happened that affected your particular finances. So now we're going to talk about money blueprints. So money blueprints are essentially what happened. Well, it is essentially how you arrive at whatever archetype that you have. And money blueprints are the psychological programming that affects money management. So once again, the 3 factors are verbal programming, modeling, and specific incidents. So these things are brought up in a book by T. Harv Eker, and he talks about the money blueprint. And my recommendation for all of you guys, definitely go to that particular book, read it. And for the other one with the money archetypes, I actually specifically spoke to Deborah Price. My God, I had to tell her that once I read her book talking about the money archetypes, it actually opened up a world that I didn't know. I don't want to say ironically, but I mean like literally that book actually changed my life, because all of the books that you see there, I actually read those first, but I didn't know exactly how to take action on all of the things that I knew. But after reading Deborah Price's book, it definitely showed me exactly how to go about it. So when it comes to all 3 of the factors, you have to understand that this is going to subconsciously dictate your financial life. So let's talk about specific incidents. So specific incidents is whatever experience you had that affected the way that you manage money. So what I'm going to tell you is, I'm going to tell you there's 2 tracks here. So we're going to talk about negative ordeals. So we're going to talk about one which is a drastic ordeal, and one that is a slow but consistent ordeal. So this one is actually pulled directly from T. Harv Eker, and what this says is, if you take a frog and place it into a pot of boiling water, the frog will immediately jump out, understanding that the water is hot. But if you take a frog in room temperature water, and then you slowly but gradually increase the temperature, the frog may never notice the change in temperature until it's too late. And that's essentially what I'm trying to tell you guys about your finances. Typically, when you have a specific instance or an event that's drastic, typically that shocks you out of whatever you were doing, and then you can make changes on it. But when it's slow and consistent, that actually can be even worse for you as far as your behavior, mainly because you may not even notice the changes that are going on. Okay, so now let's talk about modeling. So this is a learned behavior that affects money management. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is, I have a couple questions for you. How did your parents handle money? Who did you look up to as a role model for handling your money? What did you experience when asking for money as a kid? Now, I want you guys to understand. No, I know I said if you answered no. The thing that I wanted to get at is, did you have a lot of negative? Did that bring up a lot of negative feelings for you when you were going through each three of those questions? Because if it did, or if you didn't have someone who modeled money, then there's something that you should know. Okay, this is actually taken from Robert Kiyosaki, and one of the things that he said is most people don't necessarily have the same jobs as their mother and father, but they keep swinging their mommy and daddy's axe. So if you guys aren't too sure what that means, I'm actually going to break that down. Essentially what this means is if you guys didn't have a positive role model when it came to managing money, then your default programming is whatever your parents' behavior is. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be your parents. Typically, it is your parents because those are the people that you look up to and who you are supposed to emulate. Now, when it comes to managing money, if your parents were both really bad at managing their money, whatever their program is, if it was very consistent, so if they were very consistent, meaning they had a lot of negative behaviors when it came to handling money, but it was very consistent and not too much bad happened. Just something bad that would happen ultimately towards the end of the life or something like that. If that happens, then you have to be very cautious because that's the kind of behavior that you probably picked up on. Now, if they were really bad with money and then really bad things happened, then that may shock you to realize how bad their particular behavior was. But that's not always the case. So remember, drastic ordeals, those can shock you and you can see how bad they are. But when they're consistent, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly what they are. So your default programming, as far as your parents' behavior, that's how it works. It doesn't necessarily have to be your parents. It's just whoever you modeled your money management skills after. Moving on to verbal programming. These are the dialogues that affect money management. So I'm going to bring up what I brought up at the beginning of this video. And I'm going to ask you guys a question. And these are going to be, when you think about money, what do you think when in relation to one of the others? So what do you think about money in relation to lack of discipline? What about family? What about school? How about government? Taxes? What about the Federal Reserve or banks? What about big business? And what about wealthy people? So what I'm gonna guess is that money was more of a taboo subject, and it wasn't something that you were supposed to speak about. And what I'm going to also say as far as discipline is concerned is you probably think that discipline is your problem. And as far as your family is concerned, you probably only heard about money whenever whoever you modeled your behavior after, or whenever your family had money problems, it got extremely frustrating. And the last thing is, when it comes to big business, government, the Federal Reserve, and the wealthy 1%, is you think that they're all bad. So that is actually a very nice way of saying that most people actually think that they're evil or something like that. And I'm not here to say whether they're good or they're bad. When it comes down to it, it really comes down to the individuals themselves. There's people in government that are really good, and there's people in government who probably shouldn't be there. Same thing with business, same thing with the Federal Reserve, same thing with wealthy people, and same thing with the people that are around you. You may notice that there are incredibly good people around you, and there might also be people that you want to mitigate the amount of time that you interact with them. But these are typically the verbal programming that you're brought up with, and these are also the same verbal programming that I've heard when I was younger too. So what I want to talk to you guys about is why it's not discipline. So discipline is not your problem. Now, Dave Ramsey said it best: success in personal finance is 80% behavior and 20% head knowledge. So if you're not seeing results with your finances, it has more to do with what you think about money and how you behave when interacting with money than your plan. Now, this is the most important part. Whatever your plan is, it has to match up with your money archetype. Meaning, if your plan doesn't meet your temperament, then what's going to end up happening is you're not going to do it. And you have to understand, on a subconscious level, your subconscious mind is responsible for 19 out of 20 of the actions that you do. So as far as what you actually act on, you have to understand that your subconscious mind controls about 95% of your actions. Only 5% of your actions are controlled by your conscious mind. And I'm actually going to get into that when it goes into behavioral economics. Just understand that your plan has to match whatever your temperament is with money. So now what I'm going to go into money management and risk management, the risks that affect money management. So what I want you guys to know about is with the money management plan that you're creating, there's going to be 4 aspects of it that are going to be incredibly important. So those 4 aspects are contractions, worst practical cases, expansions, and reserves. So these are emergency funds or contingency plans. Let's start with contractions. These are the setbacks that affect money management. So whatever your worst case is, what I'm going to say is your worst case is going to be dictated by 2 of the following. So a worst case scenario happens when your actual income is less than whatever your worst practical case income is, and when your total expense exceeds your worst practical case expense. So if either one of these 2 things happen, then you're going to have to switch your plan from the regular worst practical case scenarios, and you're going to have to treat it as if it was a contraction. So I'm going to get into a lot more, and I'm going to get into a little more detail when it goes into the next personal finance tutorial. And that one's going to cover a lot of the stuff here. I just wanted to bring this in just so you guys see some of the things that you guys can do if you have contractions. So contractions could be job losses, it can be business losses. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that that you have at least one of these in mind, so you know exactly where to go, or you have some sort of idea of how to handle it. So you have alternative incomes, you have contingencies like emergency funds, and you also have your money management plan, and that's going to be doing income targets and expense target scenarios. Moving on to worst practical case. So these are the worst predictable case affecting money management. So if you guys remember what I told you guys with worst practical case, let's assume that it's something like income. So what we do in order to figure out what your worst practical case income would be is we're going to take income from all sources, and we're going to segment it on wherever the source was from, and we're going to go back 3 months and add them all up. So this is going to start from the date of the last paycheck. Now, what we're going to do after this is we're going to take the average per pay cycle. So it depends on when you were paid, whether it would be daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually. Then once we have an average, what we're going to do is we're going to do variance. So variance is going to tell us how reliable that average was. And once we know how reliable that average was, we're going to then figure out the standard deviation. So this is going to tell us the tendency for any one paycheck is going to differ from whatever the average is. Now, we're going to have to use a standard error in order to use the standard deviation. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a range. In order to create a range, what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 times whatever the standard error is, and we're going to subtract that from the average, creating our lower bound. Now we're going to also take 2 times the standard error, and we're going to add that to the average. That's going to create our upper bound. Now, the lower bound, as far as income is concerned, is going to be your worst practical case income. Now we're going to move on to not contractions, but expansions. And this is going to be how windfalls affect your money management. So when it comes to windfalls, coming into a large sum of money, suddenly, at first, it could be a great, and it could have positive effects at first. But soon what happens after, if it's squandered or if it's wasted, it can leave whoever came into the windfall worse off than they were before. What's important to understand when it comes to windfalls is the fact that they need to be managed, and they need to be managed more so than whatever regular funds you have coming in. So we're getting into more of that in the next video, but I just want to cover something about emergency funds. So these are the contingencies that affect money management. So when it comes to reserves, emergency funds, typically what you want to understand about them is you're going to take something like the worst practical case expense on the monthly basis. And what you're going to do there is you're going to then identify how stable the main source of income you have. So if you're something like a teacher or a nurse, that is probably some of the most stable income you can have. So the more stable the income is, you're going to take whatever your worst practical case expense is, and you're going to multiply it by 3. So now, if your income is not as stable as a teacher or a nurse or a doctor, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply it by something else. So if you guys are like an engineer or something like that, something with technical background, you can actually set that out to be about 6. If you guys are doing something along the lines of entrepreneurship, now something like that could be incredibly unstable, in which case you want to set that to be 9 or 12. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do this if you're going to start off as an entrepreneur. It's just a guideline for you to understand how much money you're going to need, being that your main income source is not all that stable. The next thing that you can look into is retirement. And retirement, I have 36 months, and that is 2.5 years. Now, you guys might be wondering, okay, so for retirement, why is it so high? And the main reason is because retirement, as far as a main source of income is concerned, it's probably the most unstable in the sense that if something happens where you can't get your whatever funds you have for retirement, having that much to recover makes it I don't want to say, I don't want to curse, but it makes it a lot easier. So the next thing that you guys want to do is, once you guys know how stable it is and what your worst practical case expense is, then what you want to do is you want to set goals to completion. Now, as far as risk management is concerned, we actually have a lot going on there. Now, if you guys note that this is probably the first time that I've said anything about savings or an emergency fund. Well, not so much savings, but an emergency fund. And one of the main reasons why, as far as how to do it, is because it fits more with the risk management series. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it on the risk management series, and I'm also going to have it on the intermediate. Sorry about that. I'm going to have it on the intermediate money management series, and check out the risk management series. That one's going to have emergency funds, insurance, and it's also going to break down each one of the plans that we are going to go through in all the other ones. So moving on to the last one, and the last one is going to be money management and debt management, and how debt affects money management. So when it comes to debt management and money management, if you guys have watched any one of the Money Manager's Process videos, then you guys probably heard me refer to credit card debt as supplemental income. Now, I want to go into the main reason why you most likely have credit card debt. So we're going to talk about supplemental income here, and this is going to be the hidden expense affecting money management. So if you guys have credit cards or another form of a loan, and you're not paying off whatever the balance is in full every month, that is the definition of supplemental income. So if you guys have a credit card and you guys have a balance at the end of the month, then you're using your card for supplemental income. Now, I want to get into why people think that is. And I'm going to say that most people probably think it has to do with a lack of discipline. I'm going to call BS on that. The main reason is you have to understand that your mind is wired to work in a certain way. So I told you guys earlier, when it comes to behavior, about 95% of the actions that you do are subconscious, and only 5% are actually conscious. And what you have to do is you have to cater to that when it comes to dealing with when dealing with your money, dealing with your debt, and dealing with risk, and dealing with overall your behavior. And what I'm going to suggest to you guys is that it's one of the four, if not all four. The first one, meaning you have to increase your income. The main reason why you probably have credit card debt is probably because you don't have enough income coming in. So the reason why I call supplemental income using credit card debt as supplemental income is because just ask yourself a question. If you had enough money in order to pay it off at the end of the month, would you do it? The answer is probably yes. And that's one of the reasons why I say that. Now, the next one, it could be you're not managing money well. Now, what I'm saying here is I'm not saying that, you're just terrible at handling money, because that's actually kind of a misnomer. It's important for you to understand that human beings are not wired to handle financial resources like money. If you, Eben Pagan said it best, we're not wired for money. And that's important to understand when you're dealing with personal finance, because a lot of the times people feel like they're supposed to be really good at it, but human beings in general aren't good at it. And that's nothing bad. You just have to understand that you're not typically wired to be good with money. And that's whether you have a passive archetype or an active archetype. It's just a matter of sidestepping the issue with your subconscious mind and your conscious mind, because your subconscious mind is going to dictate you do certain things that are probably going to be detrimental to you in the long term. Now, not the last, but the second to last thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is a lack of foresight. Now, when I talk about a lack of foresight, a lack of foresight, it goes back to just the wisdom that you put forth when you're going into debt. A lot of the times when it comes to it, most people just don't understand the negative implications of doing this. And when it comes to people who do have enough money in order to pay it off at the end of the month, but choose not to, it usually goes back to they don't understand why it's important to do that. And that's one of the things that I think causes people to have credit card debt. Now, the last thing is going to be no underlying strategy. So that's a plan. What I'm going to suggest to you is that you probably don't have a plan on how to pay back the money at the end of the month. And that's probably the reason why you're in credit card debt. And I think these four, or some combination of these four, have more to do why you can't get rid of your credit card debt than you just lacking discipline and not using it. Because in truth, if you don't have enough money, then you're gonna, in order to manage your money and manage your cash flow better, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up using the credit card. And that's because you're not making enough money, and it may be because you don't have enough wisdom to understand what happens when you do it, or you don't have a strategy in order to do it. All right, guys, so that's all I have for you. I want to thank you for watching this video. I know this video was kind of long. It's more than 40 minutes. But I want to thank you for staying with me. So if you guys like this video, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment, and tell me which aspects of personal finance affects your ability to manage money the most. Now, if you guys want more tutorials like this one, subscribe and you'll receive notifications whenever I put a new one up online. So once again, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next video. All right, guys, welcome. This one is going to be